So Harry talked about knowing survivors. Here's one thing that you need to know about me because it explains a lot. And it's led me to two of the central questions that I focused on in my life, which is that my father was a survivor. He was less than 70 pounds when he was liberated from Dachau by the American forces, and he was in an American field hospital for a year, being nursed back to health. Only a generous country would do something like that. And at a certain point, I thought, and he thought, that his ordeal started in June of 1941 when the Nazis came in and when he and every other member of the Jewish community of Svexner was handed over. And he grappled with that, and I talked to him about it over time. It's a central question. How did this happen? In 1940, the president of Lithuania said, there is no anti-Semitism here in Lithuania like in other countries. And he said, this country is based on social justice. Now, by the way, when I read that, and I'm thinking about what social justice, how social justice can be interpreted, well, he thought Lithuania, and he came and visited Svexner. How did this happen? That was one central question. I'm going to just tell you the other question, too, and we're not going to have time to get into it, although it may dovetail at a certain point. But the other question that my father grappled with was, his father was murdered essentially in front of him. His brothers were murdered. His mother had died in childbirth, with his younger brother. She was already dead. But his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, everybody he knew, there were maybe 10 people who survived from Svexner, 15 people at most. Lithuania's Jews, 99% were murdered. Svexner was not unusual. And his question, by the way, was, he knew. You know, some people grapple with faith. My father didn't grapple with faith. He knew that it was miracles that got him to the other side of being liberated at 65 pounds from Dachau. He knew that if he were sitting where Tal was sitting instead of where I'm standing, or sitting over there, he knew if he were one step forward, one step back. He knew if someone else was one step forward, one step back, he would have been dead. I mean, that's how little the margin of error was. So he knew that God brought him to his liberation and to be in Chicago and have a son. He knew that was for some reason. But I will also say, he was also, and I would say this, and it's not necessarily always an easy thing to remember, and always not necessarily easy to remember how it was manifested, but he was also angry at God, very profoundly so, because God, who had saved him, unquestionably had let his father, his brothers, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins not survive. And that's very difficult. And that is a large conversation. We may come back to that a little tiny bit at the end. But he knew he had a purpose in life. He knew he had something that he had to accomplish. He knew the Jewish people. He knew there was a reason for this, for his existence. And that always left a more than a foundation, an imprint on me, an imprint. And trying to figure out how June of 1941 came to be became one of the things that was a leitmotif in my life of thinking about that, because it didn't just happen. The Jews of Svexner didn't just turn over, the Lithuanians of Svexner didn't just turn over all the Jews. The Nazis didn't just come in. What happened was, sadly, retchingly sadly, is that the population of Europe, the population of Lithuania, the population of Svexner had been prepared with lies, with conspiracy theories, with slanders about Jews. When my father was growing up, before my father was born, I found this from archives, there was a blood libel about Jews in Svexner that caused a lot of it caused a pogrom, Jews to be harmed, killed. And then there was a second blood libel when my father was a young man, and luckily in this case the supposed victim turned up in health, so it ended. But from then on, Jews were treated in a very different way. Jewish shopkeepers, they had a little had on their sign, whatever their sign was, someone would put a little black smear of tar to say, these are Jews, don't buy from this store, boycott the Jews. I don't know where I heard that before. And don't interact with the Jews. Don't do a lot of things with the Jews. And they were prepared with conspiracy theories where Jews in Svexner were at one hand somehow supporting the fascists in Germany, and on the other hand the communists in the Soviet Union. None of it made any sense. But June of 1941 would not have happened and could not have happened unless the local Svexner neighbors who knew the Jews, had lived with the Jews for generations, were convinced that these lies about Jews were true, that there was a conspiracy, that they were part of some evil cabal of Jews that were somehow manipulating the world. I went to a university, Northwestern, that as part of its motto, truth and searching out truth and making sure that one gets at truth. And I'm not going to read it to you, but I'm going to say Yale happens to be a university that goes by the motto of light and truth, although the Hebrew isn't exactly that. It's called light and truth. And yet, I'm really worried, more so than I have been at any time in my life, that we're losing a sense of truth. And if we do so, horrors will happen, because they have happened when we lose sense of truth. We want to embrace truths that we like, that are warm baths, that make us feel good. If this is a rarefied group, but if I were to take the country as a whole and say two things: Donald Trump lost the election of 2020, and there was no Russian collusion. If I were to say, now that would make 35% of the people wouldn't believe one of the statements, 35% of the people wouldn't believe the other statement, even though, of course, both are true. We are deeply, deeply losing sense of what is true for what we'd like to be true, for what our fantasy or our conspiracy theory for what we think is truth. In my book, and this is what really became, to a degree, my mission, Harry knows this, is to scrutinize and to encourage other people to scrutinize what's being said and passed as truth that are just lies. And in what I did in the book is show, I don't want to go through this all now, but show how conspiracy theories about Jews have become like common knowledge and common belief. There's a professor at Northwestern who wrote a book, The Hoax of the 20th Century, which is particularly maddening to me, who wrote a 450-page book or so, and heavy with footnotes, tenured professor at Northwestern, explaining how the Holocaust was made up. These tens of thousands of documents that depict the Holocaust, the minutes of the Wannsee Conference, all forgeries. The testimony of folks, of Nazis and others who confessed to murders, confessed to being perpetrators, said they were witnesses, said they were bystanders, confessed to and were to all sorts of things. They were poor, innocent Nazis who were bamboozled by Jews, these crafty Jews, to say things that they would never have imagined doing. And by the way, on the left, it's just as bad. I show professors at Northwestern who are talking about all sorts of things. You have a professor who's written, a professor at Rutgers who's written a book that says that, the startup nation? Well, actually, Israel is using its technology, its biotechnology, to hack the DNA of Palestinians to systemically starve them. It's engaged in rampant organ harvesting. Whenever a Palestinian actually thinks they're going to the hospital in a ambulance, they are being diverted to have organs harvested. This is written by a professor, full professor, with tenure, past peer review, published by Duke University Press, won Best Book Award from the Women's Studies Association. That's what it says. I can't make it up. Israel's using biotechnology somehow in the air with Wi-Fi and other things. I mean, it's voodoo. It's voodoo. It got someone tenure. And by the way, I talked about a professor on the right who's a Holocaust denier. Professor Saleda writes that the Nazi Holocaust was a precursor and part of a long-term plan by Jews to rid Palestine of its indigenous people. He writes that flat out. It's published by Temple University Press, also past peer review. These are lies. I don't need to tell anybody here these are lies, but they're preposterous lies. They're no less preposterous than the lies that were told in Sveksner, Lithuania about Jews. And the smearing and the boycotts are no less than the smear on the shopkeepers, the Jewish shopkeepers' signs. So what I'm going to charge you with, I think, is we're all here for a purpose. My father thought he was here for a purpose. He was here for a purpose. And Zichrono Livracha, he accomplished a lot. You're sitting here in Yale, whether you're from Rehovot or New York City or LA. Somehow we're all gathered in this place. We're sitting in a place, in a university that should be dedicated, and I believe is, to truth and light. And I think it's our mission right now, with so much falsehood, to have the courage to believe in truths and to find truths that aren't necessarily what we want to hear. You have to hear the bad news first. And I'm going to say one last thing, because I was saying this to Rabbi Hecht before, is that we also live in this strange age where sometimes the best liars stick only to the truth. And this is what you have to watch out for. You can use statistics, you can use facts, and you can narrate them. That's a new thing. And what I was saying to Rabbi Hecht was, if you read the third chapter, since Harry talked about the first and second chapters of the Bible, I have to talk about the third. We'll be here as we work our way through the rest of Genesis. I don't know what you've got cooking, Tom. But in the third chapter, that's the story of the snake. and Eve. Read that story carefully. The snake never lies. Doesn't say one falsehood. Manipulates the truth in a very interesting and devious way. And you have to look out for that too, because the snake is the first narrative writer. The snake says, did God say not to eat? Did God say that you can't touch the apple or the fruit? It's actually not an apple pear, but I'm going to super simplify for now. Did it say you can't touch that fruit? Did God say that? Well, no. God sort of gaslights this into Eve's mind. Well, if you can touch the fruit, you can eat the fruit. Meanwhile, God had said in the previous few verses, just don't eat the fruit. But by confusing it, the snake successfully creates a theory that sort of overtakes the truth and turns it into something else. I mentioned to Rabbi Hecht the article in the New York Times about the Hasidic schools. You can take a lot of facts and you can create a narration. And I'm going to leave you with this, because what I'm saying about being ruthless and having courage for truth will help you not only in your moral life, but in your business life. In 2008, 2009, 2010, there was a big financial crisis in the United States and across the world. It started with mortgages. It started with these things called CDOs, called MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and hybrid securities, and subprime securities, and CDOs, and all this other stuff. And the fact of the matter is, it was all built on untruths. And anybody who could figure out the truth could figure out that there was a massive fraud going on here. And the few people who did came out okay. Indeed, some made money because they were willing to look at truths, and because everybody in the rating agencies, everybody in the investment banks all became attached to these falsehoods about these mortgages. And it blew up. And sooner or later, lies blow up. The nice thing about finance is sooner or later there's a reckoning of dollars and numbers. The bad thing about the rest of the world is sometimes there's reckonings in human bodies and all sorts of horrors, as I talked about before. So my charge to you, Harry left you with a charge. My charge to you is we're here for a reason. We're all here for a reason. We've all taken a journey up to today for a reason. Find your purpose. Focus on the truth, even when it hurts, even when you don't want to admit it, even when it'll make money, even when it'll cause people to be annoyed with you. And I'll leave you with the words of my friend Barney Frank. The best test of your authenticity is whether you're willing to piss off your friends.